Don't mock. I'm not a fool. And people who know me personally know that I am not a fool. But I won't get into the details of those. I just want people to realize that I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool.
Hey there, it's Tony Curl here, and welcome to this very special three-part series of the Dumb Leaders podcast. Now, it's not hard not to be aware of the incidences that have occurred on the United States since the election. Now, I've purposely waited until the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States before I put together this particular series. The series of events have been quite bewildering, compelling to watch, I guess, in so many ways, shapes and forms. And, you know, right up until the inauguration, there was always that expectation that we were all expecting surprises right up until the end. But in this three-part series, I just want to provide my thoughts on the occurrences, some of the language that's been used that's led us to where the US sits right now. But before I get started, I just want to make a couple of really simple points. The world, and especially the world in the United States, is more divided than ever. It's not the United States, it's the divided states of America. We seem to have very binary views in the world. We're either on this side of politics or that side of politics. You're either on the left or the right. And then on those particular pockets, we've got the extreme left and we've got the extreme right. And what we increasingly see is that people who, if you don't share my views, then you must be wrong and you must be whatever the name gets called. Now, I've mentioned many times that insults don't influence. And there's a chain of thought also that protests must make people uncomfortable. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Influence is built from respect and understanding, and it's that influence that changes mind and perspective, not about uncomfortable, disruptive protests, and it's certainly not about calling each other names. Name-calling becomes like the last bastion for someone when they've run out of evidence or they've run out of some thoughtful discussion. So today's episode will focus on what I saw and in part a summary of the 4-year term. So what was seen, what was evident, and what was reported, because I do believe that the reporting of, well, most things in the United States, depending on what sort of channel you are watching, is dependent on the thought process that that you may form, that you may have. And what I see few and far between is that commentary or commentators or people are becoming more reliant on a single source and less reliant on a multiple of sources. And I think it's always relative to be able to, have your favourite news program or your news media, but also go looking for some of the contradictory or the contrasting viewpoints. So at least then you are making your mind up or forming your own judgment based on what you're listening to. I have a wide range of sources, and, the reality is all you need to do often is go to Twitter and you will see both sides of the argument. You'll also see a lot of language, you'll also see a lot of name calling, and ultimately you don't see a great deal of influence because of that. But you will start to understand what are the other sources of information that you can be going to have a look at. Now, when we go back to when Trump was president or part of the process, November 2016, Trump's presidency was greeted, I guess, initially with a bit of widespread disbelief. And we also saw a large number of protests at the time of his inauguration. The hashtag #NotMyPresident became popular, and the legitimacy of the win was questioned. And that ended up being a constant over the 4-year term. We heard Russian hackers, Russian interference. So the presidency started on what you cannot say was positive terms. We had one segment of the population very visually upset that Trump had been appointed or elected, and that many of those people would still refuse that America actually had a 45th president. So why was this? Trump appealed to a segment of the population who felt that they were increasingly being ignored. I mean, if you were to sum it all up, there's a range of issues here. But increasingly there's a segment of the population who felt that they were being ignored, The world has changed and is constantly evolving, and many haven't had that same evolution. Many haven't felt that same need to change. In fact, many of them felt discarded, and seeing this summed up with slogans like white privilege left them increasingly alienated in the world. So when you're voicing your concern and people are saying, oh, poor Didham's white privilege, you ultimately stop voicing your concerns, but you certainly don't change your mind. So when they had someone like Trump come forward and say, let's make America great again, all of a sudden they felt that there was someone there that they can listen to. So as a leader, Trump had his positives and, of course, his negatives. He was a master at manipulating slogans. And when we looked at things like Crooked Hillary, for example, that really tended to appeal to people. So his tendency to think out loud meant he was often criticised for thoughts and questions. And the size of his ego certainly didn't help him. So there was a range of things where Trump was a little bit of a master, and a range of things where he certainly wasn't the master. Being outside of the established political world meant he made some enemies, both in his own party and the opposing party, the Democrats. And his 4-year term was met with constant political warfare. And this was highlighted by the Speaker of the House, highlighted to me by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, tearing up the Trump State of Union address. Now, this, to me, is a disgraceful act. No matter who you are, no matter what you are, you still should have respect for the role of the president. And to me, that was a disgraceful act of absolute disrespect. Now, politics is a tough game, and 4 years of Trump was met with challenges at every single term, ending up in the disaster that it did. Now, I've got no doubt that Trump saw himself as the savior of America. Yet there were so many that couldn't allow themselves to see that. And Trump fundamentally never allowed himself to even remotely compromise around his platform. He believed his echo chamber, and that was the reason that he could never unite. That was the reason why he could never bring America together on the one platform. There were people that wouldn't allow themselves to see it, but Trump never compromised one little iota. He believed his echo chamber. So many people benefited from Trump. Can I tell you, there are some achievements in that 4 years of presidency that Trump had. But the ones who ultimately benefited were the ones that deposed him at the end. So I'll just let that one sit for a while. The ones that ultimately benefited were the ones that deposed him. So we now have talk of unity, and to me I think it's quite humorous that by magic Trump was the one that brought hate and division to America. Blatantly untrue. Right throughout the history of the country there's been hate and division, and it's fair to say it's always been there. All right. So the talk of unity, unfortunately, will only go so far. Unity requires listening. Unity requires understanding. And with the way that the binary thought processes that are absolutely already evident, that's increasingly unlikely. So Trump could not unite for the perception of others, and his own actions wouldn't allow it. But the same will also be true, will probably be true of the new administration. So the ability to unite requires a catering for all, to listen, understand, have empathy, consideration of all in decision-making processes, for all in decision-making processes. But how that gets measured and how that unity gets built is actually from actions. So it's one thing to listen, it's another to have action. So as a leader, there's a lesson for you in that. So if you've got a disruptive team, if you've taken over a poor performing team, it is the actions that you have. Yes, you need to listen, you need to understand, you need to have that ability to get people trusting you, but then it's your actions where the actual unity takes place. So the ability to unite requires a catering for all, a listening, an understanding, and empathy. But then ultimately it's action. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode, the first series of the downfall of a president, the 4-year term. So I will check in very soon with episode number 2, where I will share some observations on the elections. And then in the final installment, I'm going to once again share some observations around the downfall of the president post-election. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you all next time.
Don't mock. I'm not a fool. Don't mock.